you so much for joining. Please keep chatting in. Let us know where you're joining from, what grade level you are teaching. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. So my name is Brenna. I am an account manager at Listenwise. This is my third school year with Listenwise. Before I was in the classroom, I taught 3rd through 8th grade, a little bit different settings. I taught science and social studies and English as a foreign language in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I will kick it over to our next host. Her name is Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Jones. I am a 3rd grade teacher at Clovis Unified. I have been teaching for 4 years, and I teach 3rd grade. I might have already said that, so sorry, it's been a day.
Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm at TK. I'm currently a 6th grade teacher.
Nice. Well, thank you both so much for being here. We have an array of early elementary to upper elementary people in our audience today, and I'm excited to speak with both of you about Listenwise. So our agenda for today, first we're going to start off with learning about Listenwise Foundations. What is that? How does that work? You're going to learn about some scaffolding within the Listenwise platform. And then we will hear some shared elementary activities as well as real life examples of our 2 teachers using Listenwise in their classrooms. So what is Listenwise? For those of you who are not familiar with Listenwise, Listenwise is a supplemental platform for your classroom for students to have audio in the form of podcasts to practice their listening skills. We have videos that are paired with some of our podcasts as well, and they are from grade levels 2 to 12. We have lots of scaffolds for all types of students that can help with our English language learners, students suffering from learning loss, or just any extra supports that can really help students with their literacy skills. We have lessons from English language development, ELA, science, social studies, STEM, current events, SEL. We have lots of different partners that we work with, and always getting more partners to help us out and help educate our students. So what is a Listenwise foundation? So we're going to practice what this looks like now. So we start our Listenwise foundations off with a weird news story. Weird news stories are under 30 seconds long. And one way that you might use Listenwise in your classroom is show this picture. You might ask students, what do you think of when you see this picture? What do you think this is a picture of? And then we'll talk about which came first, the dinosaurs or the octopus. You can always highlight the vocabulary at the top of the page. You can see we have fossils and ancestors as our 2 vocabulary words. And also you can slow down the podcast by about 20 seconds. So in this podcast, I want you to be listening for the words fossils and ancestors, because afterwards you will have to use it in a turn and talk with your partner. That's one way you might introduce a lesson to your students. So let's listen to the story together. Follow along with a transcript like you might if you were singing a karaoke song.
Good morning, I'm Layla Falden. Here's a question for you. Which came first, the dinosaur or the octopus? Dinosaur seems like the obvious answer, right? But in Montana, scientists recently found a fossil that suggests otherwise. It's of an early ancestor of modern octopuses and lived about 330 million years ago, before the age of dinosaurs. Researchers believe it had a sac filled with a dark liquid, just like the ones today, but also had 10 arms. Really incredible stuff.
All right, so did we hear our words that we were listening for? Did we hear fossil and ancestor? So one question you might ask your students afterwards is turn and talk. What would you call an octopus that has 10 arms? So would you still call it an octopus, or would you give it a new name? So just some fun ways to bring in conversation for students to get learning and talking at the beginning of class. So what are some learning goals for Listenwise? So we want to pair language and content together. Oftentimes our learners, the content is lowered to meet their language needs, and we want to really pair those together. We also add vocabulary and academic language into each of our podcasts so that students are really hearing words spoken that they need to be hearing. We have language and literacy skills. So I'd like to think of this as 4 different puzzle pieces, really rooted in listening. Then afterwards, you can have a turn and talk to add some speaking. We have written assignments within the platform to practice the writing. And as students follow along when they are listening to the karaoke style transcript, that covers some reading. These really pair with our content and building background knowledge for our English learners, and especially in the learning loss from COVID, SEL skills, and we practice critical thinking skills. So those are our goals for using Listenwise in the classroom. I'm curious to hear from Hannah and Alicia. Have you used weird news in your classrooms? And so how has this helped meet your learning goals?
Yeah, I actually use weird news almost all the time. That's definitely what we start with because they are such short clips. So weird news is what I introduce Listenwise as and to my students in the 3rd grade. And we honestly continue using weird news probably up until March or April, just because they are so short. They're high interest typically. And you guys have a wonderful collection of them from over the years too. So you can filter back really far. So even though I've heard about the potato perfume for Valentine's Day last year, some of my kids this year haven't. So they really love it. And I tend to rely on that really heavily, especially as we gear up for state testing in May.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. And Alicia, how have these podcasts helped meet any of your learning goals?
Yeah, so I use them for mostly with my small groups, just for my ELD group. I have used them a whole class, and I love them because they can be used independently, and they are like super engaging, like what Hannah was saying. I mean, they really keep their interest. They don't even know that they're learning, so it's wonderful.
Nice. Yeah, it's always great when we can trick them into learning fun ways. Okay, so how do you use Listenwise? How do you browse on Listenwise? Something I want to draw our attention to is, as of yesterday, could we please go to the next slide? As of yesterday, we released our new collections onto our platform. So if you haven't logged into Listenwise yet, please do so today so that you can see our new collections. So in these collections, you can filter by grade, by subject, or by ELP level. So here you can see that we have searched for our collections in our elementary school. So these are stories that are filtered together who have like-minded ideas, and these fit really well with your curriculum. So if you're looking for something specific, I suggest starting to search with collections. Like I said, these just launched yesterday, so take some time to explore by your grade level or your subject and find lots of lessons that go well together. Also, another way to browse is through, instead of looking at collections, you can just go straight to lessons and you can search by elementary lessons or by ELP lessons level 1 through 3. So on our screen here at the top, when you search for elementary school lessons, you can see that this is the title, and these are all of our lessons that have been found in elementary school. So you can scroll through, see different pictures, give students different ideas, ask them, what do you see? What do you think of when you see this picture of a wildfire? To really stimulate conversations. So just another way to find really solid elementary lessons for your students. And last but not least, a new feature that I want to make sure everyone sees on our Listenwise is our translations. We have added 15 new languages this year. So this is found on the student account. So in your students, they will have this, what we call as our text help toolbar. It's the blue bar that you can see at the top of the screen. When you click on the settings, it can help translate. And if there is a speaker, it will read it out loud. If there is not a speaker, it will still translate it, but it will not be read out loud. So I have chosen French as the language I would like to translate it to. So you could see on the other side of the screen, I've highlighted complete the steps of the assignment, and I've pressed the global button, and that does the translation. So students can read it, and if I press the play sign, it can read it right back. So out of these three features that we've seen so far, Hannah and Alicia, have you used translations in your classroom, or which way is your favorite way to search? So Alicia, do you want to start this time?
Sure. So I search by subject. So like if there's something specific that we're already studying whole class, then when I bring it to my small group, I kind of still stay within that content. I didn't know that there was a translation, so that's amazing. I can't wait to try and use that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And Hannah?
Yeah. I search weird news a lot. That's also one of the drop down menu options. And so I usually just head there for the first few months. But right now we just started a unit on bats. So I'll kind of do the same thing that she just mentioned. I'll search bats and I'll find what I need. And then we have our ELD kids in a group throughout the day. And so when I assign them individually, I will use that translation option with them in the small group. So I kind of utilize all three at different times of the day or different times of the year, and they've all been wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing. So up next, we're going to hear some tips and tricks about using Listenwise in Hannah's classroom. So Hannah, could you share what are some ways that you've found that you best utilize Listenwise in your classroom?
Yeah. This kind of has been my few tips and tricks as I've hopped into Listenwise. One of my favorite things to do, especially because I'm working with third grade. And so up until now, they've really never worked on listening skills outside of what they're doing in the classroom. So this is their first time where they're ever getting like questions based off of what they're listening on or listening for specific vocabulary words. And so that filter option of story length honestly changed my life. So being able to filter it down to 30 seconds or a minute, it really made, I used to search through for hours trying to find one that was a minute long so I could build their stamina a little bit. But that really helped me. Of course, if your students are a little bit older, that 12-minute one might be their jam, but for third grade, we barely have 30 seconds to get through. So that was super helpful. I love offering student choices. So sometimes I'll just pull up the weird news page and say, what do you guys want to listen to today? What are you into? I have like teacher juniors or student jobs of the week, and sometimes I'll give them the opportunity to choose birthdays, anything to give them those choices, classroom votes. There's also an option to favorite and tag certain news articles that you find or podcasts that you find. So at the beginning of the year, I know we have a few days we can prep, or if I have a few hours after school or on my lunch, I'll go through and just favorite and filter a bunch of them at the start of the school year. That way they're already loaded. They're ready for me. All I have to do is go into my favorites and my tagged areas and just click one that day. I know if you're anything like me, I can be kind of last minute. So after recess, I know that I'm going to pull up a Listenwise. So I'm going to go to my favorites page and just click one. I don't want to spend hours searching through that week. So I definitely load up my favorites. And I use my tags to filter or tell myself quickly about how long they are. So of course, weird news is going to be short, but once I start to filter them into longer time frames, I'll label them 1 minute or 2 minutes. That way I can know which ones are ready for my kids. Same thing with connections to curriculum. It's already kind of been touched on, but it's really easy to search like what animals you're studying or different curriculum things. I've actually been surprised as to how much has been on Listenwise that I wouldn't have expected. Like when we started our BATS unit yesterday, I didn't think that Listenwise would have anything super useful on BATS. And lo and behold, they had a whole entire ELD lesson. So I was able to even front load some information to my ELD kids to make their process in our learning a little bit easier too, hopefully. And it's even beneficial outside of EL, but for some of my slower learners or learners that just need a little bit more time with that information, Listenwise has been great to connect to curriculum. The other thing that I love about Listenwise is you can reach out to them and they will absolutely take any thoughts or advice from teachers. And so I feel like this is one app or one type of curriculum that really listens to teachers and here's what you need. So I actually reached out to a person on campus just asking, hey, can Listenwise do this? Do you know how to filter by story length? I really need that in my life. And she reached out to Listenwise for us and got that implemented. And so, like I said earlier, it changed my life. And I think that they are really willing to work with teachers. So kudos to Listenwise, and I hope that some of those tips, and oh my goodness, it's the end of the day, tips and tricks were helpful.
Thanks, Hannah. Alicia, do you have any ways that you use student choice in your classroom? I know that you talked about independent work.
I just typically if I assign a whole class, then it's going to be something that I found for them, just specific that I want them to get a little bit more, maybe either enrichment or maybe even just go a little bit, maybe even background knowledge like Hannah was saying. So no, I haven't given them a choice. I voluntold them, and I don't let them volunteer what they're going to do. So yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing. So another way that we work with our English language learners, especially in the elementary space, is adding extra scaffolding. So like I mentioned earlier, with content and language being paired together, we don't want to lower the level of content just due to students' learning capabilities. So we really believe in scaffolding up, in making sure that the content is still relevant to age level and grade level appropriate, but there are extra scaffolds to help. So Hannah, could you share a little bit more about ways that you have scaffolding and implementation added into your classroom?
Yeah. I will say too, starting in third grade, this is definitely a younger group at 8 and 9. So I really do a lot of whole class scaffolding. So I'm sure it looks very different by the time you're getting into upper grades. But as far as my classroom goes, I introduce, my lights turned off on me. I introduce a whole classroom discussion. And so I'll pull up a weird news, say, hey, what do you guys think? Kind of like you started our webinar today. And then we'll, same thing, listen for certain vocabulary words, or I'll even ask them silly questions like, what was the name of our podcast host today? What was the joke at the end? Do you guys get it? Because I'm also still trying to build even their like sense of humor at that age. They don't necessarily always understand the jokes at the end. So really it's just exposing them to what Listenwise is and exposing them to the goal of, we're going to listen to this for the purpose of answering a question, not just following the instructions that I give you at the beginning of the day, like their usual listening skills are. But hey, we're going to talk about it, turn and talk with a partner, stand up, go find someone wearing the same color shoe as you. And it's just really a whole classroom discussion or partner talk. So after, I would say, a few weeks of that, we're in week 7 now, and we're still in that classroom discussion phase. They just have not picked up as quickly this year. I'd say by quarter 2 in a few more weeks, we're going to start doing some more journal tasks. And Listenwise provides us with questions underneath certain podcasts. So sometimes I'll pull those questions, or sometimes I'll even add in a few of my own too if I need to scaffold up or down, depending on how my class is doing. That way it's feeling like more of a task. It's not just like, hey, this is funny, I like to listen to it, haha, I can mess around when I'm up with my neighbor and she has no idea. And now I'm checking their journals. I'm able to see if they're hearing the important things and catching on. And we're also practicing writing complete sentences and race responses and restating our questions, things like that. So it ties into our writing as well, which has been really nice. So I can move it around throughout my day too. If I want to do it during writing time, I can, or reading. Once I get a little later in the year, it becomes a station assignment, which sounds very similar to maybe how upper grade does it, right? Those kids are a little more independent. So by the time I'm building up their stamina, they are independent enough to do it at a station, and they know what my expectations are and what Listenwise expectations are. Ultimately, by the time they are doing those assignments, I am just major prepping them for the CASP, which is our state test here in California. So I am making sure that they can listen to a certain level or a certain length of text and answer those questions efficiently. and properly. And so that's nice for me too, to be able to check those station assignments and be able to provide one-on-one help as necessary too, and that they do have options for the ELD students as far as like translation goes or things like that. So station assignments are definitely super helpful. And my favorite thing about this is by the end of the year, when they get to the CASP test, we've put in all this work, all this time goes into prepping them, and all this time for Listenwise, which is something new for a lot of us teachers here. And it just seems like that extra task, but it makes my teacher heart happy when we get to the state test at the end of the year and we close out and they say, Miss Jones, I knew how to answer that test, that question, because I know what word I was listening for. I know you told me to read the question and find an important word, and I heard it and I could go back and forth. So you also teach them all these skills on how to be successful when doing it on their own. And that just brings joy to my heart when I can see them be successful on their own after all the scaffolding that we do throughout the year.
Wow, Hannah, thanks so much for sharing. It sounds like you're really working to, build in that independence into their classroom. For people joining from other states, this can be greatly paired with the WIDA test, as that also mirrors it very well. One thing that teachers have shared too about as it starts to get closer to testing season, they turn off the ability for students to have access to that transcript. So they're really, really practicing those listening skills without the transcript. So, all right, let's go on to our next one. So some English language learning specific things that happen in our classroom. So Alicia, before we jump into do you have anything in particular on one of these topics that you would like to share with us about your students?
So I do, as far as this slide here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do for vocabulary, typically depends obviously on the text, but whenever there's vocabulary that's provided for it, like some of the quick ones that there isn't necessarily vocabulary, but I usually print those out for them, and then we put that into our notebooks or our journals, and we start there, and then we get into the Listenwise. So yeah, I always kind of have all those things prepared like ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for sharing. Hannah, how have you used some of these with your students?
One thing that I really appreciate about Listenwise as well is their teacher guides when it comes to the ELD lessons. That has been wonderful to just be able to have an idea of what I want to teach, be able to go there for some extra resources and have a teacher's guide and wonderful questions already loaded. So that's been really lovely. And then I really like the different videos that can come with the EL lessons. Same thing with vocabulary. The vocabulary words are great because some of my students, whether they're EL or not, might not be familiar with this vocabulary. So same thing, I'm able to explicitly teach them some of these vocabulary words that they wouldn't see in their spelling list, that they wouldn't see in any of their other books. They're only ever going to hear them in Listenwise and outside or in future textbooks and things. So it's been really good to be able to like preview vocabulary with them, especially for example, like the BATS unit, it comes up with the word nocturnal. So now I'm able to teach them nocturnal before we go and read the text, which also uses the word, and seeing their faces light up because they already know the word and they know how to say it. And now it's not a struggle when they're reading is really, really exciting to see. So I just love using Listenwise and love seeing what it's doing for my students as far as growing their vocabulary. Improving their reading skills, even though they're not necessarily reading everything, they're able to hear how language is spoken and hear how different people pronounce different words, and they're practicing that themselves too. So it's nice to have someone else talking in my classroom, even if it's for 30 seconds or a minute. I can see the impact that Listenwise is having on my EL students and beyond.
Nice. Thanks so much for sharing, both of you. Yeah, I think one thing that's really unique about Listenwise is because we have so many different sources, students are hearing so many different English dialects. So they're not always hearing this AI that we often hear in our translations, but they're really hearing people from all over the world speaking in English with all different types of tones. Another thing that is really cool about Listenwise with our high interest podcasts is these topics are things students are interested in and students are learning about. Oftentimes with our English language learners, especially in the maybe upper elementary level, they're given early English or early or elementary books to read. And they're like, these books are for little kids. And I'm not a little kid. So keeping the interest, the topics very up to date can really help them. Oh yeah, I do actually want to learn about these things. So just some different ways to help out our English language learners because they are seen and valid in our classrooms as well. Could we go to the next slide, please? So here are some ideas that we have for elementary activities. Please feel free to share in which ones you've done in your classroom as well. So having sketch notes, so really using their brains with notes. So having one about bees and drawing the notes out. I see someone in the chat just shared about beekeepers. So yes, having different science lessons be drawn out. Another way is having an SEL lesson and having students draw, what did you think about? Or as they're listening once or two times through, the first time just listening and the second time drawing, what does this make you think about as you're listening to the story? Another activity that's really fun, especially for our little ones, is maybe after recess or after lunch break, they're coming back in and they still have so much energy. So make it a game, make it fun. Have a story about bats, have a story about animals. They listen, they practice their words, and then they can really share out, oh, I'm going to sound like a tiger today. And then throughout the class, we have different tiger activities, or every time you need to get the students' attention, everybody roars back. Just some ways to make it fun and make the listening meaningful in your classroom. My favorite, some added supports in your classroom are anchor charts. Anchor charts. I can see, Alicia, you have one right behind you, right in your screen, lots of anchor charts. So one thing I like to set the tone and let students know the expectations from up front. Hannah, you were sharing a little bit about setting expectations in your classroom and students knowing what they should be doing. So especially for our little ones, sitting still is sometimes hard, especially when they're just listening. So having an active listening checklist. My eyes are focused. I'm listening with my ears. My hands aren't, fiddling around. My feet are still. So really letting them know, what should I be doing as I'm listening? Starting with just listening and not needing to take notes can be difficult for our learners. Another thing is thinking stems, talking stems, writing stems. With our English language learners, these can be really, really helpful tools to just get them started, just get them talking, just get their ideas going, just get their brains going. So, and then also, if you have a talking stem, hey, Hannah, talk to your shoulder partner and tell her what you did yesterday. Then that shoulder partner has to share out with the class what Hannah did yesterday. So not only is she practicing speaking, she's practicing listening, and then she's practicing reciting back to the class or reciting to someone else what she just learned. So these are really great thinking, speaking, and talking stems. Hannah, Alicia, do you have any other anchor charts that you can think of that you've created for Listenwise so far?
I have an active listening chart on my other wall that looks almost identical to what you have. So I definitely reference that all the time for more than just Listenwise. So it definitely comes in handy. I don't have a thinking stems chart like that, but at the beginning of the year, when I am answering questions with them, I put them up on the board as we're answering the different questions. I'm a PowerPoint girl, so I'll throw up the PowerPoint and create it every morning, and those will pop up. So those two I definitely do, but I love the idea of drawing and coloring and all those sounds too to go with it, because that's a very useful tool. So I'll definitely be implementing them.
Great. And Alicia, what kind of anchor charts do you make?
I have, this is actually a borrowed classroom. Mine
Oh.
has a class in it right now, but it is a very lovely one that she has in here. Oh, okay. But I do use sentence frames. Mine is different. I don't have the active listening. I have what does a successful student look like, that we reference to. They created them themselves. And yes, lots of sentence frames, lots of
Yeah.
sentence starters. They have them in their notebooks. We have them on our walls. So, yeah.
Yeah, having those sentence starters can really be helpful just as they're learning to rephrase. And yeah, I see someone put in the chat, anchor chart I have is I heard and it makes me wonder. I notice it said. So yeah, great ways to get students talking in your classroom. Some other added supports are some notes. So Alicia, can you share how you use these notes in your classroom? And then I can share about the Avid notes as well.
So the one is the chart that I do for them, and then the other one is a small journal that a student sample. So I use Just Jots, and what we do is we look at all the questions first before we even get into either reading a text or listening, in this case. And we look at the parts of the question that are important, so that way when they're listening in their notes, they're jotting the gist that goes with the question. And then we go back through our notes, and this is where the answer goes. And so that's how we use them. And we do that before we even preview a text. So.
And then do you find that students are using the same style when they're taking the test, the CASP test?
Yes, that is, of course, the hope. But yes, I do see them, they're folding their paper and they're looking at their questions and then they're going back and then, yeah. So that's exciting when it comes to that part of it.
Yeah, they're allowed to use one piece of paper. So if we can teach them how to take notes and use the graphic organizers and, you know, really get into that routine, then hopefully they'll use it when the time comes.
Yes.
Another great way of adding notes is using your Avid supports. I know that we work with a lot of Avid schools. So if you're in an Avid school, could you let us know in the chat? And again, just like in the just notes, looking at the keywords before asking the discussion questions before, then looking at the topic. Well, what are we actually going to learn about? And then as they're going, you know, they're writing down the keywords, they're listening. And on our ELD lessons, especially, we encourage 3 listens. So maybe the first time you're just listening, the second time you're taking your notes, your third time you're checking your answers. So really teaching students how to listen with 3 times and what's the best way to help students succeed. All right. Last thing I want to make sure that we discuss is with our elementary learners talking about social emotional learning, SEL. Is a huge topic right now for all of us. It was my favorite thing to teach in my classroom is how do I incorporate SEL into a science classroom? So being really grounded in, yeah, we're going to listen to this and we're going to build empathy and work on this together. In our new collections that I just shared, we have some SEL elementary lessons and then some SEL within our ELD lessons. So we're making sure that all of our students are supported in SEL lessons. So Hannah, have you used Listenwise in any of your SEL things you've done in your classroom?
I haven't. I have honestly never even thought about it. We have a curriculum that we use called Positivity Project. And so I usually just roll through that curriculum and expand on that. But you better believe I'm going to go searching after this to see if there's anything good for open-mindedness this week. So I think it could be really good even to, I know we do things like social stories. If we have students that kind of struggle before they're going out to recess, we can read a little book with them. But I'm just, you know, my brain's firing off all these ideas now of, well, maybe I could assign them a Listenwise. That would probably be more interesting than that book that they don't like to read and things like that. So I'm really excited to go searching through those.
Ah, thanks so much. And Alicia, what about you? Have you used Listenwise with SEL?
I'm not gonna lie, I have not. I hadn't noticed them before. But yeah, I agree with Hannah. I think this would be a great idea, especially for our goal setting, because that's one of the things that we focus on a lot in our classroom. Not just before testing, but just going into, we're here in the middle of the quarter. So I like it. I'm gonna check that out also.
Yeah, one of our podcasts that we published this summer is called how to be your own best friend. So it's really talking to kids like, oh, if I'm looking for a best friend, what would I want to be like? And then you can really build out a lesson and just talk to kids like, how do you, I'm about to go to recess. How do I look for friends and how do I show up in that way? So lots to do there, lots to discuss with those little ones, and really making sure that they are grounded in learning and grounded in themselves. So when it comes time to learn, that they are focused on learning. So just wanted to draw our attention to that. And our 5 fan favorite podcasts, if you are listening live, can you add it into the chat? What's one of your favorite podcasts? And if you are not, can you add it into the comments? What is a podcast that you love to listen to? So Hannah, can you share about any of your favorite podcasts?
Yeah, I put on big-eared bats, in case you did not learn already that we're learning about bats in 3rd grade. So that has been really fun for us to hop into. And then some other ones that my kids liked last year, we really liked Unlikely Animal Friends. That was one of those ones towards the end of the year that we got to work on, because it's a little bit lengthier of a podcast. And then using the scientific method to win a hot dog toss. I use that on one of my STEM Fridays. So we got to listen to that. We didn't do a hot dog toss, but we did another sort of STEM project that connected to the scientific method. So I kind of put those all on there to offer a variety of things. And as I'm still learning, clearly you can look up just about anything on Listenwise, including SEL and all of that good stuff. And it's almost a guarantee that you'll find something that connects.
Nice. Thanks so much. And Alicia, do you have any fan favorites that you can share out with our listeners?
Yes, so we did one about bees, and the kids really enjoyed learning about bees and the consequences of them, the decline in the number of bees. This is the one that we had listened to. And then one of the more recent ones we learned about was a sea turtle that had 2 heads. And the kids just thought that that was the greatest thing. And we learned a new word and it was fun. So it's just having that something that they can relate to, I think, is why we love Listenwise so much.
Yeah, definitely. The bees activities are so fun, especially with 6th graders. Maybe with the 2-headed turtle afterwards, you could draw what's another animal that you might see with 2 heads, or, really get them thinking and being creative. So I see some people adding some into the chat. So thanks so much. Learning about different history podcasts. So well, I think that wraps up our time today with our wonderful guests. Thank you, Hannah and Alicia, both for joining us and sharing a little bit about how you use Listenwise in your elementary classrooms, especially for your English language learners.